You know, we hear words like OCD and bipolar thrown around all the time, but do we really know what they mean? Today, we're going to dive into that huge gap between our everyday slang and the clinical reality of mental health. We're going to deconstruct the myths to get to the truth. I mean, come on, you've heard someone say this, right? Maybe you've even said it yourself. And look, it seems harmless enough, but when we use these really serious clinical terms for everyday quirks, we accidentally flatten out the reality for people who are actually living with these conditions every single day. So let's start by looking at what's really going on.
All right, first up, let's tackle the conditions that get tossed around like they're just little personality quirks. It's really time to separate the buzzwords from the actual brain science.
Okay, so this slide right here shows the perfect contrast. Pop culture has kind of turned OCD into just a synonym for being a neat freak, but the reality, it's this relentless, exhausting cycle. It starts with obsessions. These are unwanted, intrusive thoughts that just pop into your head, and they're then met with compulsions, these repetitive actions someone feels forced to do just to quiet that intense mental static. And this quote, wow, it just gets right to the heart of what it feels like. It's not about a preference, It's about desperation. Just try to imagine a constant screaming fire alarm going off inside your head that only you can hear. That compulsive behavior, like checking the lock 10 times, that's the only thing that feels like it can temporarily hit the snooze button on that terror. And it's a really similar story with ADHD. The common myth, especially not too long ago, was that this was just a disruptive kid who was lazy or just needed to try harder. But the clinical reality is that it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. So, what in the world does neurodevelopmental disorder actually mean? Well, it's just a way of saying the brain's wiring is literally different. It's not a matter of willpower at all. The brain of someone with ADHD genuinely struggles to prioritize information, and that affects absolutely everything from focus to impulse control. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and move into mood disorders. Now, these conditions get sensationalized all the time in movies and TV, and they're often just boiled down to simple, dramatic mood swings. But the reality is so much more complex. And this is so crucial. Bipolar disorder is not the same as being moody. We all have good days and bad days, right? That's normal. Bipolar disorder is defined by a cycle of extreme, completely distinct poles, the intense highs of mania and the absolutely crushing lows of depression. Let's start with mania. This is not just feeling happy or energetic. It's a state where your brain is completely supercharged, like it's stuck on fast forward. We're talking racing thoughts, little to no sleep for days on end, and this feeling of invincibility that can lead to incredibly risky decisions. And then, the crash. The depressive episode in bipolar disorder is this profound, deep emptiness. This buffering analogy is just perfect. It's not just sadness, it's the feeling that your core functions have literally shut down. An everyday task like brushing your teeth can feel like trying to climb Mount Everest. All right, now it's time for some major myth busting. There are a few conditions that Hollywood in particular has twisted almost beyond recognition, and it's led to some of the most harmful stigmas out there. This brings us to probably the single biggest misconception, one that has caused an incredible amount of harm. Is schizophrenia the same thing as having multiple or split personalities? The answer is a clear, definitive, absolute no. They are completely different conditions. And honestly, this confusion is almost entirely the fault of fictional movies and TV shows. So if it's not that, what is schizophrenia really? Well, this analogy gets us so much closer to the truth. It's a condition that scrambles how the brain processes reality. It can involve hallucinations or delusions, where it becomes almost impossible to tell the difference between your internal thoughts and the external world. Now, the condition people are actually thinking of when they say split personalities is dissociative identity disorder, or DID. And again, the reality isn't some scary movie trope. It's an incredibly complex and tragic survival mechanism. This process shows exactly how it forms. It starts with severe, repeated trauma in early childhood. When that pain is just too much for one young mind to handle, it fractures. It creates separate identities, known as alters, and each one is tasked with holding different traumatic memories, all to protect the core person. It is, at its very root, about survival. So you're probably seeing a central theme emerging here, right? It's this need to shift from judgment to understanding. We have to recognize the massive gap that often exists between an external label and what a person is actually experiencing inside.
A perfect example is borderline personality disorder, or BPD. From the outside, the behaviors can be really misinterpreted as manipulative or just overly dramatic. But what's actually driving them is a terrifyingly intense fear of abandonment and this constant draining struggle with overwhelming emotions.
I love this quote because it perfectly captures that internal experience. Imagine your emotions don't have a dimmer switch. They are just always on full blast, like emotional high beams. That is the reality of BPD. It's not a choice to be dramatic. It's an exhausting, relentless state of being completely overwhelmed.
And let's just quickly circle back to depression because it's so pervasive and so deeply misunderstood. It's so important to remember what it isn't. It's not just being sad. That's a normal human emotion. And it is absolutely not a weakness or something you can just snap out of. Which brings us to the single most important point of this entire explainer. All of these conditions, OCD, ADHD, bipolar, schizophrenia, BPD, they are medical conditions. They're rooted in brain structure, in chemistry, and genetics. They are not, and I'll say it again, they are not failures of character.
So we'll leave you with this question. We've replaced some common myths with the clinical reality today, but the real challenge, that starts now. How can each of us take this understanding and use it to change the conversation about mental health in our own daily lives? Thanks for exploring this with us.